In this section, we will dive into misrepresentations and omissions of material facts. Now, for whatever reason, the Real Estate Commission takes it a step further with material facts. It's not just enough to say, okay, well, you have to disclose them. We've talked about what would get you in trouble. And so these are the categories, okay? You could misrepresent, you could omit, and it could be willful and it could be negligent. So if I say misrepresentation, what does that mean?
You lied.
You lied. You said something that wasn't true. That's exactly right. If I say an omission, what does that mean?
Withheld information.
You withheld information.
Withheld.
There you go. You didn't disclose something that you should have disclosed. Okay? Well, if I say something was willful, what does that mean?
You did it on purpose.
Intentional.
There you go. Intentionally, done on purpose. And then what about negligence?
You didn't know, but you should have.
Yeah, you didn't do your job right. You didn't have the expertise. You didn't have the requisite knowledge. You didn't know, but you should have. All of these things, y'all nailed it, folks. And so we break these all into different kind of words, right? Willful, intentional and deliberate. Negligent, you didn't know. You should have known. You didn't do your job right. You didn't handle it with reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Misrepresentation is saying something that's untrue. And then an omission is saying nothing. Now, for whatever reason, they like for us to be able to identify which of these occurred. And so when you combine them, you can have willful omissions and negligent omissions. And you can have willful misrepresentations and negligent misrepresentations. If you're trying to piece these together, folks, take it a step at a time. Look at the individual words that indicate, okay? Knew, was aware, was told. That's going to tell us willful. Said, stated, displayed, advertised. That's going to tell us a misrepresentation. Didn't say, didn't share, didn't disclose. That's going to tell us an omission. And wasn't sure, didn't verify, didn't do the research is going to tell us negligence. There are key words that help us understand these. Now, I will give you a word of caution, folks, because a lot of students mess this up. If I said that Caroline listed a property where she knew about a potential zoning change and failed to disclose it, she would be guilty of a what?
Willful omission.
Willful omission. She knew about it and she didn't disclose it. That'd be a willful omission. So now, let me change something here. Caroline knew about a pending zoning change. And I called her and I said, Caroline, love your listing. I'm very interested for my clients. Anything that I need to be aware of about this property? And she says, no. What did Caroline just do?
Is that willful misrepresentation?
Yeah.
It is. And here's why a lot of students get this confused because they're like, well, she didn't tell you that's an omission. No, she said something. Folks, if you say anything, it can't be an omission. So when she said no, she misrepresented information. You see the difference there? The only way you can commit a misrepresentation is by saying something. And the only way that you can commit an omission is by saying nothing. Now, just for clarification point, the saying something, it could be displayed in the MLS. It could be in your advertisements. It could be verbal. It could be an email, but it was still stated. So don't get those confused. You got to be careful because there will sometimes be questions on, was this an omission? Was this a misrepresentation?
Right. Okay.
So let's give you a couple examples here of each. All right. A willful misrepresentation. Okay. If the agent knows, okay, there's that keyword knows telling us willful, knows the heat pump at a listed house does not function properly, but tells a customer or client, doesn't matter, right? Because we owe it to everybody. Tells a customer or client that all mechanical systems are in good condition. Then this agent would be guilty of a willful misrepresentation. And the words are indicative there. Knows tells us willful. Tells, says, states, tells us misrepresentation. So let me give you the world's hardest pop quiz. You ready for this? This is so hard. Okay, ready? Oh, whew, yeah, focus. Pop quiz. Everybody get real intense. Where the agent knows of a material fact and intentionally misinforms anyone concerning such fact, the agent would be guilty of a what?
Willful misrepresentation.
Willful misrepresentation. Wasn't that the hardest pop quiz you've ever had in your life? How did y'all come up with that? Y'all were so stinking smart. It just blew my mind. Yeah, willful misrepresentation. Okay, well, let's go to the next one. Negligence. Okay. Negligent misrepresentation. Listing agent records incorrect information in the MLS. Buyer's representative provides the MLS sheet to the prospective buyer. So that would be a negligent misrepresentation because it is incorrect information, but they disseminated it as truth. And so now this listing agent would be guilty. Let's give you an example. If you pull your square footage from the tax card and it's not right, that would be negligent misrepresentation. If you pull the wrong school zone from a previous listing, that would be negligent misrepresentation. You didn't do your job right, you didn't verify information, but you disseminated it as truth. Let me give you another really, really, really difficult pop quiz. You ready for this? An agent unintentionally misinforming a party concerning material fact the agent should reasonably have known about is guilty of what?
Negligent?
Negligent misrepresentation. Hardest pop quizzes you've ever done in your life. Now, here's where I'll provide clarity on a consideration before we wrap up the other two, folks. There is something that has historically been called the reasonableness standard. However, I will tell you that sometimes the way the information changes is funny. As an educator, I have to go to update instructor seminars. I have to go to conferences. And so the commission never formally made a change to it, but the commission is now calling this the reasonable broker standard. Okay, it's the same thing, but I guess it just sounds better than reasonableness standard. I don't even know that's a word, but it's called the reasonable broker standard nowadays. And so here's what they're deciding. When you are found to have been guilty of a misrepresentation or an omission, and they're not sure on that negligent side of things, folks, they look at what they call the reasonable broker standard. And what they ask themselves is, would a reasonably prudent broker have known this? Should a reasonably prudent broker have known this? Meaning, if they took anybody else in your market who seemingly knew things about the market, would they have been able to identify this? And if the answer is yes, then you're in trouble. If the answer is no, that there was no way to know this, then you're probably not in trouble. And that's what they're looking at, which is why I caution about going outside of your geographic location. And so we have this obligation to independently verify and look into information on, schools and, zoning and square footage and, making sure that we verify, not just disseminating things at truth without verifying them. Now, please be aware you are not allowed to put disclaimers. Okay. You cannot be like, and people do this all the time, don't they? Oh, buyer's agent to verify square footage or, lot size to be verified by it. You can't do that. That's not absolving you. I would argue that there's only one disclaimer that's, remotely acceptable. And I'm going to talk about disclaimers a little bit more later. But I would argue that the only one that has any validity whatsoever is the verify school zoning, because there are so many caps in so many areas that even though you may be in one, it could be capped and you might be routed to another one. But they're not going to save you. And so the real estate commission can and does hold the listing agent accountable for providing accurate information, which is why we're going to spend so much time in section 2, where we talk about working with residential and commercial sellers. So willful omissions, next on the list. When an agent knows of material facts and intentionally fails to disclose those facts to all parties, the agent is guilty of a willful omission. Now, this is where we clarify, even though you have a strong sense of fiduciary duties to your seller client, if they tell you to withhold material facts, that is not a lawful, willful instruction, and you cannot uphold it. It even says it on the RPODs and the listing agreement that material facts, we know, we got to sing like a bird, regardless of what they ask us to do. Because if they asked us to withhold it, it would be an illegal order, and we don't have to follow those. Say, no. Can't do it. So, willful omission, agent knows a zoning change, highway, etc., that would adversely enhance or adversely affect the value but fails to disclose to the buyer. That would be a willful omission, okay? You knew about something and you failed to disclose it. And remember, there is no obligation to ask, like I did in that earlier scenario. They have to willfully disclose this and intentionally disclose this. So there's no like tricks, right? Where you're like, hey, any zoning changes I need to know about? And you're like, you got me. I wasn't going to tell you, but since you asked, now I have to, right? It's not like a riddle that you have to figure out. So always have to disclose regardless. So the negligent omission piece, folks, seller informs listing agent of roof leak, listing agent forgets and fails to disclose leaking roof in the MLS. This is an example. Now, what we mean here is actually forgot. Oops, I forgot they told me that. I forgot to put it in there. Please understand that these do not really hold any different weight. You're in trouble whether you forgot or whether you actually forgot. And so it's not going to absolve you. And so let me give you kind of another thing. If you didn't know about 540 and so you didn't disclose 540, that'd be a negligent omission because you should have known about it. If you're doing any business in the triangle, that is very highly publicized. And so failing to discover it, failing to disclose it would be a negligent omission. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do at this point, folks. I got a fun-filled activity that I like for you to play around with these, okay? I'm going to share it with you in the chat, and I'm going to let you go back in your breakout rooms and do these. And I don't necessarily think that you need all the way up until your next break, so I'll give you like 20 minutes. But it is a bunch of different examples that I want you to read through, and I want you to tell me if it is a willful or negligent misrepresentation or omission. Let me pull this up here.